Welcome to Lesson 2 of the Maintenance and Reliability Professional Review course, Business and Management 2. And again, my name is Dave Krings, your instructor for the Maintenance and Reliability Professional Review course, and you can reach me as shown here on the slide. The objective today is to continue on with Pillar 1, Business and Management. Translate an organization's business goals into appropriate maintenance and reliability goals that support and contribute to the organization's business results. The agenda for Lesson 2, Business and Management 2, is to first identify and manage the risks of change. Second, construct a business case for change. Third, communication skills for maintenance champions. Fourth, planning and budgeting of resources. And last, maintenance and operations performance agreements. This slide, showing the 5 pillars model from the Society for Maintenance and Reliability Professionals, is the basis for lessons 1 through 9 of this program. The first objective in Lesson 2 of the Maintenance and Reliability Professional Review course is to identify maintenance risks and responsibilities for risk. Let's take a look at that. As you modify and improve the maintenance process to be more proactive, it can have an effect on how you handle some of the day-to-day issues within your organization. And it's a good idea just to remember that they may need some attention. For instance, hazardous materials handling procedures. Process safety management, which is a regulatory issue as well as a safety issue. Third, environmental requirements. Fourth, community emergency response, if the community around your facility could be affected by what you do inside the plant. And fifth, hazardous work safety management. Continuing on with management of risk and identifying maintenance responsibility for risk, you also need to pay close attention to engineering standards and codes. The more you standardize your equipment, the better reliability you're going to have, and the less mistakes you're going to make when you do repairs and adjustments. Also, code requirements, of course, is a regulatory issue, and they need to be followed as well. If anything, a proactive maintenance approach is going to make you better at handling standards and codes. Second, life cycle costing. Life cycle costing is a simple thing. It's really the calculation of the total cost of a piece of machinery from its installation until the day that it's disposed of, including the costs to purchase it and dispose of it at the end. It's quite interesting that many times the initial purchase price is not the controlling factor in the cost of the life cycle of a machine. So it's important that maintenance, engineering, and operations work together to do a good job on life cycle costing so they purchase the right machines. Third, repair versus replace decisions. You're going to have a brand new window into your world of information because data will be available to calculate whether repairing a piece of equipment or replacing it will be the best decision. Don't forget to utilize the information. That's why you have it. Fourth, spares levels. As your proactive maintenance approach becomes a way of life in your facility, you are going to be able to adjust your spares levels in your storeroom inventory downward. In fact, a lot of the inventory that you carry will become unnecessary and different things will become more important. For example, many facilities, as they become more proactive, will find a higher usage of things that are consumable, such as filters and routine tools that you use for preventive maintenance, and much fewer uses of things like bearings and seals and larger items that could be purchased as a planned job rather than kept on hand for breakdowns. Once the breakdowns disappear, you don't need those parts any longer. Fifth, asset care level and frequency. Normally, the asset care level and frequency of doing things such as preventive maintenance were based on how long the machine could survive between failures. This is not necessarily the case when you're in a proactive maintenance situation. You're going to tune and refine the usage of many different tools, including preventive and predictive maintenance, and even run to failure in some situations where the piece of equipment is of low criticality. And you'll be able to tune the frequency to match what the machine needs individually in the process that it's used in. So normally what you will see is actually a reduced amount of preventive maintenance after you become more proactive, rather than an increase. Wait and see. I think you'll be surprised. Another part of managing risk is to quantify risk where possible, in terms of quite a few things actually. First, personnel and asset protection. Of course, we're trying to preserve the assets and keep our people safe and the environment safe. Second, cost. That's a no-brainer. The cost of the damages caused by something that's not addressed as a risk could be tremendous. Third, lost production. Of course, the reason that you're in operation is to produce a product. So you want to make sure that the impact of unexpected failure or a mistake is minimized. Legal concerns. Certainly many of these things are affected by legal issues such as process safety management and compliance issues with the environment as well as safety. And fifth, compliance commitments. If your organization or operation has made compliance commitments to any regulatory agency, or just a compliance issue with the local area, for example, noise reduction, odor control, many things that you'll see in different facilities, you need to hold up your end of the bargain in those situations as well. Continuing on with the management of risk, we need to identify risk management approaches and tools. The top three things that you're going to consider in terms of risk would be financial impact, legal impact, and market impact, in one way or another, using different terminology or this terminology. But if you're taking a look at the overall risks, those are the big three. How are we going to be affected in dollars? How are we going to be affected in legal fees? And how is it going to affect our customers? The tools we can use, there's a long list, but some examples of tools that you can use to reduce risk would be the criticality of the equipment. If you're dealing with your equipment in a calculated criticality method, you will know what your high criticality equipment is and your low criticality equipment. The higher criticality equipment has an impact on safety, the environment, production, and quality. So if you're doing the right things and you're minimizing those risks on your high criticality equipment, you're taking care of business. A fault tree. Each piece of equipment has a range of different faults that could occur and failures that might occur and different causes that could generate those failures. If you have those identified in advance and have taken the time to consider how you would deal with those situations and how those failures would impact finances, legal, and market, you're far ahead of the rest of the folks in the industry. Planned work. Planned work is safe work, and it also avoids failures and increases reliability. So when you're planning more, you are taking care of financial issues, legal issues, and market issues by default. I'm sure you can think of quite a few examples that I don't show here. In management of risk, it's a good idea to identify responsibility for risk containment. You know what the risks are, and you understand how you can mediate those risks. So who's going to be responsible? First, assign a specific position to each risk. Now when you take a look at that statement, notice that I say position rather than person, because as people move through their different roles and positions in the company, you want to make sure that the actual role has the responsibility, not the person. So if there's someone with a particular expertise in dealing with a certain risk, if they move on, you don't want to make sure that they're always handling the risk, even if they're in a role where it's totally inappropriate. You want to make sure that the risk containment stays with the right position. Second, make certain that the responsibility is in writing. Be clear about it. Make sure that you sit down and have a long discussion and make sure that everyone understands specifically what you're talking about. The risk, the types of things that could cause the risk to become a problem, and how you want it handled, so that when the person is responsible, they also understand what they're supposed to do. Third, verify that the responsibility is carried through when position is filled with new personnel. As I mentioned before, when you have transitions and turnover, you need to make sure that the responsibilities carry through. Next, we need to identify compliance tracking methods and containment success. Track the facts. When you know what the risks are, and you know how they can be created, and the problems that can result, and you know who's taking care of it and how they're going to take care of it, make sure that you keep track of this. You document how it's handled, and you show the successes openly throughout the facility. So many times you'll find that only failures are communicated, and the hundreds and hundreds of times that successful avoidance of risks occurs is never mentioned. Make sure that you don't fall into this trap. You want to be giving credit to people who are doing a good, proactive job. The next opportunity would be to implement solutions. Here's where the rubber hits the road. When problems do occur, use the facts to develop solutions and find the root cause of the failure. It's interesting that the exact things that you're trying to implement with this initiative are the things that fuel it. In other words, root cause failure analysis is something that you want everyone at the site to become very comfortable using and very interested in adopting. At first, they're not going to know what to do, but you as a leader will need to apply it to get to the point where they can adopt root cause failure analysis just like you. So here's your chance to shine. Second, and this is very important, avoid blame. There are going to be mistakes made. There have been mistakes made in the past, and some of the new process changes are going to create some opportunities for new mistakes. But instead of placing blame, work toward continuous improvement. Acknowledge learning when you make mistakes and document them. Learn from the mistakes and move ahead. As we talked about a couple of slides back, it does no good at all to beat on people. The best thing that you can do is learn from your mistakes and congratulate those who avoid the failures. When you have a breakdown, you should be conscientious that breakdowns are not acceptable. You should learn from them and avoid them again in the future. As with everything else we're going to talk about in lessons 1 through 9, measurement is going to be a key component. When you're managing risk, you need to manage the risk using measurement. Measure the results. If you have 20 identified possible risks that could occur from a proactive maintenance approach, measure your success in getting rid of those failures and risks. Measure your mistakes. Measure how you dealt with the mistakes. Document everything and identify the variances from what you expected. Understand why the variances happen. Use Six Sigma methods if desired. I encourage you to take a look at what Six Sigma is all about. It's actually a very structured, well-managed approach at dealing with issues that are caused by statistical problems, things that are measurable, and variances in your operation. It's an excellent tool. Very interesting. Third, use the facts to manage risk. You have information. You have to generate a habit throughout your organization of working with facts, looking at the information and making well-educated decisions and not reacting emotionally. Take appropriate change actions. As I mentioned, with the facts you can make changes that make sense. First, resist the urge to react without data. This is very difficult at first, and you may struggle with it yourself even though you know that it's not the right approach. Second, coach others to interpret data. Teach people to look at information on a piece of paper, look at trends, and ask the right questions of why it's happening, and have them formulate actions that support what the facts tell you. This is an acquired skill. It's something that anybody can learn, and it's not always intuitive. It takes practice. So please give plenty of opportunity for people to practice. Show examples when it works. Provide people with trends and charts very often and show them how they're used on a day-to-day basis so they become very comfortable with them. Watch out for emotional responses. They are your enemy. Now we're shifting into the business case preparation objective for today. The first thing we'll need to do in this case is to identify business needs and direction. First, we need to relate business goals and objectives to the need for maintenance process change. I might sound like I'm beating this into you because we talked about it quite a bit in lesson 1, and here we are again. We're talking about business goals and objectives, concrete things that the business needs to achieve, and they're clearly identified by good leaders. So take those business goals and objectives. There shouldn't be too many of them. They should be quite well defined. And take a look at how you can use those to document and communicate very clearly what maintenance needs to do to change to support that objective or objectives. Second, market your maintenance strategy that you built. Market it. Market the plan to the leadership in their terms. And when I say their terms, we're talking about money. State your objective. What are you trying to achieve? Be very clear and concise. First, identify the current status. If you're doing completely reactive maintenance and it's costing you money, then say that. Tell them how much it's costing. Tell them what specific activities are occurring in your process that are causing the money to be wasted, the production to be lost, the quality to be affected, whatever the case may be. Second, take a look at production demand versus capacity. If you're struggling to keep up, show how maintenance affects that. Operations cost opportunity. Every operation is working with a set of fixed costs and a set of variable costs. Interestingly enough, as you put in the proactive maintenance approach, you may find that your operation can actually run at a higher capacity than anyone thought in the past because of the fact that the reliability was never any different. It was always affected by reactive maintenance. It's not uncommon at all to find out that you have what they would call in Japan a hidden factory. There's enough hidden capacity in your process to generate remarkable amounts of improved production. Fourth, degrading capability. If you're affected by your maintenance process in a way that's driving down your capability to produce at a rate that you used to be able to do, this is a very serious situation and you need to communicate that as well. The next step in business case preparation is to identify the expected or required state for production levels, costs, etc. Many of these things are individually based upon the operation. But we're just taking this one step at a time from identifying the current condition, the problems that this creates for us, where we'd like to be, and moving on from there. Continuing on with business case preparation, identifying the method or methods to close the gap would be the next task. The first thing you'd like to do is outline and highlight the maintenance initiative steps, what will be done. For instance, if you intend to add a planning organization to the maintenance program, state that and explain it in clear detail. Second, always connect each initiative that you highlight to the business goals. Make sure that you're always speaking the production departments and the leadership's language, which relates directly to cost and productivity. Now let's discuss the asset case strategy for component replacement. Sometimes the proper approach for dealing with a reliability issue is the complete replacement of a piece of equipment or even an entire process. This can be calculated, and if you're aware of this situation and you have the information to back it up, you should include that in your business case. It may be a large capital project, and this may need to take some time for justification and discussion, because at the upper levels of leadership, equipment replacement can be a fairly serious issue. Second, component replacement, repair, or renewal. If you have any equipment that is a particularly important piece of equipment that requires a major repair or a major renovation, now would be the time to communicate that. Run to failure operation. Some pieces of equipment and certain processes are best managed by allowing them to run to failure. A classic example of that would be a low criticality area with area lighting, that the lamps and the lights can be run to failure. Light bulbs do not need to be replaced in a lot of cases based on reliability. They just run until they burn out and then they're replaced. There are other cases where electrical lamps need to be replaced based on reliability calculations. It just depends on the situation. As an important part of the business case strategy, you need to develop a capital strategy. It may be necessary to spend some money on capital equipment, facilities, management tools, and some spare parts to carry you through in the project and also to build the maintenance and reliability program. Part of the management tools would be the computerized maintenance management system or ERP software that you might need. If it doesn't exist already, you're going to need to invest in a good, high-quality product in this case and the hardware that supports it. Some capital spares may also be required. You can probably make yourself a list in relatively short order of the things that you might need for a capital strategy inside the business case. Don't forget to include these. Operational procedures are also part of the business case preparation and also part of the maintenance and reliability program. Identify the operational effects on reliability. The production staff affects equipment reliability by how they operate the machines and how they operate the process. Include the operational staff in training on maintenance, such as total productive maintenance, where a best practice shows that operators can make basic adjustments and repairs to their own equipment if it makes sense. I know this is an organized labor issue in some cases, and it needs to be negotiated, but it's something that makes a lot of sense and frees up the maintenance technicians to work on more complicated and more challenging tasks. Third, recognize that standard operating procedures for the production departments are part of the reliability effort. If everyone operates the equipment within the standard operating procedures, reliability will improve. Standard operating procedures are the same exact kind of instructions that you have in standard maintenance procedures that the maintenance team is going to work from. So why not adopt it across the whole operation and have standard procedures for everyone? Quantify the costs and benefits. If you're going to make a business case, you have to speak in dollars. So why not take the time now to take a look at the costs and benefits of each of the actions that you're recommending to take. Take time to do this thoroughly. Gather your information. Be able to defend your position. Second, costs are easier to identify when you have the information to work from. So collect the information and build systems that will give you clean, accurate data, and then use it to calculate the costs. Third, benefits are more difficult. It's tough sometimes to measure things other than costs because they're intangible in a lot of cases. It requires a complicated benchmarking study at times. It requires data from outside sources such as associations like the Society for Maintenance and Reliability Professionals and others, and past experience. It's going to depend greatly on how your operation works, where you'll get these benefits. Keep in mind that the benefits are often surprisingly large. Don't be put off by this. Don't cut the numbers in half. Calculate what they will be and stand by them. Make sure that you have information to back it up. But it really is the truth. It's not unusual at all to cut maintenance costs by 50 to 90% on a per unit of production basis as you do this reliability initiative. You're going to increase productivity, you're going to decrease rework, you're going to decrease quality issues, you're going to improve safety, you're going to be more reliable. So what's going to happen is your costs are going to go down on a number of fronts all at the same time, and you'll be surprised at how much benefit you generate from such a simple change. We're going to come full circle again and talk about stakeholders. We need to identify the stakeholders that will need this business case information. To whom must we communicate? Let's take a look at the next slide. Who are the stakeholders? In all operations, there is some variation in how the structure is laid out, but the maintenance staff, the operations staff, and the engineering staff are the three key elements, and they often are abbreviated as MOE or MO. The other affected stakeholders might be considered the supply stream staff or by another name in your operation, but we're basically talking about purchasing, the storeroom and inventory control, and the accounting staff, and off to the side, the administrative staff. Communicating with the stakeholders would require that we identify information that the stakeholders require. It's going to be different for each group. The maintenance department is going to need different information to buy in than a production group will. This only makes sense. They see things from such a different viewpoint. So make sure that when you get ready to communicate to the stakeholders what you plan to do, and when you build your business case, that you tune the message to the audience. think about this a little bit before you go ahead, because this is a key point. Maintenance people don't think like production people do, and engineers think a little different than those other two groups. The purchasing, accounting, and storeroom supply stream staff also has a different viewpoint. The important thing is we need to get everyone thinking the same way about reliability so that we can all work together. Otherwise, you're going to all be pushing in a different direction. Second, some people will need more background information than others. It's not going to be very hard to convince maintenance people who are used to reactive maintenance that proactive maintenance makes sense. People get tired of running back and forth between breakdowns trying to deal with problems that are not well planned. They see very clearly that planned maintenance is an improvement. Those that work outside of the process don't see that everyday chaos that goes on in the maintenance department to keep machines and equipment running. Therefore, the only thing that's important to them is speed and, of course, the quality of the repair. So make sure that you provide them with background information and give them a view into the maintenance organization and show them what's happening behind the scenes. Third, some will see the program as obvious. You don't need to spend a lot of time with them. Those are the people that are going to be the champions of your process. Identify them. When you see somebody obviously getting it openly and clearly and excited about it, grab onto them and utilize them to help you market the program. They're going to be an ally for you out on the floor, and they're very, very valuable. Fourth, this is an exercise, a massive exercise in change management. That's really all that it is. Everyone knows that planning and scheduling work and doing things reliably is cheaper. They understand that. If you've ever taken a vacation in the past, you would know that you don't just decide on one day to take a vacation and leave with no planning. It would just be too costly, and there'd be too much waste and mistakes made. Well, change management is an acquired skill. You need to learn how to deal with it, and you need to help other people transition through it. Number one, they need to learn to let go of the old ways of doing things, and it takes careful assessment of what they have to let go of and how you're going to make it so they understand that there's a value and a motivation to let go. Second, accept that the new ways are going to be applied to them under stressful conditions. They need to be prepared for this and given a chance to vent and given a chance to make mistakes and supported throughout that by the leaders at the site and the leaders up through the chain of command. Last, they need support, and they need leaders who will stay focused. So when things aren't going well, that's when you're going to find out who's a real leader in your organization. They'll stay on course, they'll still be positive, and they'll tell other people not to give up, and they'll tell them thank you for putting up with the struggle. Let's take a look at where we will get the information that we need to build a business case and communicate with the stakeholders. Let's identify those sources and go down through a list of some of the obvious ones. First, key performance indicators. In a lot of cases, even if you don't have a very automated process, you will have some key performance indicators that are kind of customary and common in your culture. Keep them, use them, and adapt them to your maintenance and reliability process. As you become more proficient at collecting information about your process, you will have some measures, as in how much planned work you're doing, how much rework you're doing, how well you're complying with your schedule. Collect that information and trend it. Extracted information from history. Well, you might not have any history now, and you wouldn't be alone if you didn't. You will begin to build history as soon as you realize how important it is to the process. When you start getting history, you will have information there that you never saw before, and it will be very useful. So keep that in mind. Fourth, don't underestimate the value of customer feedback. Your customers out in the field, in the production departments, are going to be affected by what you're doing, and sometimes they're going to be really frustrated, particularly in the first year or two, because you're going to be making changes that are going to actually make their job harder for a short term. If they're aware of how that's going to affect them, and you give them good early warning of it, and they understand why it's happening, they'll tend to be much more supportive, and they can endure some pain for a period of time to get the results. But talk to them often. Make sure that you're not a stranger and that someone who cares is showing up periodically to check in on them and find out when it starts to get better, if it's showing up on their end. Make sure that you give them a chance to vent. If they're frustrated, listen to them. Sometimes they might give you some pointers that'll help you ease things up for other people. One of the most important things about communicating with stakeholders is to identify the best method for communication. This is going to vary greatly from company to company and site to site. First off, you need to match the communication method to the culture at the site. If you have a very technically advanced organization, communication through electronic means might be just right for you. In other more traditional and older facilities, you may have a hard time with that, so keep it in mind. Any method that works is good, so don't be afraid to try something new. Be wary of email methods, because email is a one-way communication tool that can't be responded to immediately, and it really lacks emotion, so it's hard for people to understand what you're trying to say if you're communicating complicated information. So just be wary of that and use it sparingly. Fourth, try multiple communication methods. Marketing people call this a drip campaign, but if people get multiple communications of the same facts, they'll buy into it better, they'll understand it better, and they'll see that it really is permanent and that you're there to stay. So maybe they'll get an email, they'll get a newsletter, and a presentation periodically, and these things will say the same things to them in different formats. Everybody gathers information in different ways, so if one thing doesn't hit home well, another might, and the combination of 3 to 7 different communications will do the trick much better than one communication that might not be well matched. They use what they call the 7 times rule. Marketing people tell you that someone needs to see a message communicated to them 7 times or more before they're going to act on it. So make sure that you're communicating at a level where people are seeing the facts over and over again so that it gets embedded in their memory. Now it's time to perform the communication task. All the work that you've done to get ready to communicate is done, and now it's time to go to work out on the floor. So assign responsibility for all communication. Make sure that there's a formal process for it, so it's not something that people pass around back and forth as a task that needs to be done. Someone should own this. It's that important. It should be managed from one person, and it should be done in a very organized fashion. Second, strictly enforce the deadlines and quality control. Make sure that your communication is getting out in a timely manner, is coming out very frequently in a consistent period, and the quality control is good. The communication is being portrayed in a very professional manner. It's very clean. It looks the same every time, and people can understand where it's coming from, and they know who to go to if they have questions. Insist on a method of maintaining consistency across all platforms. Make sure that you're saying the same thing. All of the calculations and things are done the same way all the time, and the communication looks very similar across all the different platforms. Say the same thing all the time, so it's very clear that you know what you're doing and you have your act together. Fourth, and I mentioned this a couple of times already, be ready at all times to defend your facts. There will be someone to challenge you around every corner. Here's a follow-up step. Review the effectiveness of your communication. You might be seeing that there's some pattern to my communication here compared with everything else we've talked about. We always have the same structure where we identify an issue, we plan for it, we schedule it, we execute it, and then we follow up. This is what they call the 6-step process, and you'll see this in more detail as we go along. But basically, you're building a process that works the same all the time, and while you're building the process, you're using the process. So I think you're going to find out that you'll be well versed in the 6-step process by the time you put it into play. So while reviewing the effectiveness of the communications, the first thing you would do is talk with customers of the communication program to see if they are hearing the messages as intended. Ask them to tell you what they're hearing. Ask them to give you their impression of how it's going. Ask them for their input, and listen. Listen, listen, listen. That's part of communication, and it's often overlooked in a process like this because it seems like you only need to gather information and portray it and communicate it, but listening is not always emphasized. It's very important because you're going to get your feedback from the receivers of the communication. Second, don't assume that you're doing well. Just because you're communicating a lot and you're communicating good information and you're using good quality tools to communicate doesn't mean that the message is soaking in. You have to look at it very carefully, listen to your customers, which would be the receivers of the communication, and find out if it's getting through to them. And if it's not, do a root cause failure analysis on it and find out why it's not and fix the problem. Now we're going to move on to planning and budgeting of resources. Step 1 would be to create an annual production center staffing plan by week for the year. This is a big effort, and it's going to take some time. It might be completely alien to your site, because if you don't plan more than a couple of days in advance, or even not that much, planning ahead by the week for an entire year might sound somewhat ridiculous. But you're going to find out in short order that you will be able to look ahead one year and be fairly accurate, and get more and more accurate as you get used to it. So what would be the things that you would put on this staffing plan? Well, you'd talk about improvement efforts that are planned for the upcoming year. Scheduled maintenance, such as planned, preventive, outages, contractors on site, and training that's required for each department. Corrective maintenance, you can estimate this, and emergencies, you can also estimate how much time you need for that. Obviously, early on in the project, you're going to be fairly reactive, and there's going to be a lot of emergency work going on. I urge you to try to start with enough coverage to do those emergencies, and then quickly remove the non-emergency work. And what I'm saying here is some emergency work is not really an emergency, and until you build some prioritization rules, you won't know that. As soon as you start to recognize the emotional emergencies, start to whittle those off and cause them to be more planned. As you do that, you'll be able to reduce the amount of people you dedicate to emergency work, and also corrective work for that matter, because your reliability will go up and breakdowns will go down. Next, create an annual materials plan. Your material usage is something that you can look at history to plan for, at least initially, because you're not going to increase your reliability immediately. So you can plan ahead for your materials usage for scheduled maintenance, such as preventive work and outages. You can also have estimates for corrective maintenance and emergencies. If it happened in a particular way every year up to this point, it's probably going to be very similar in the first year going into a reliability program. As time goes on, that will not be the case, and you'll shift over to a zero-based budgeting program, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Next, we'll load level unit resource requirements. This is very important. As we start working on maintenance and reliability improvement, you're going to find out that people will have the same old work they always had, plus some new initiatives to work on. And until those things get put into place, there won't be a reduction in workload from the old things that are going to go away. You can't eliminate the old way of doing things until something new is in place that works. So, with load leveling, the first thing we'll do is plan ahead to avoid overloading resources. This means you might have to stop doing some things that you're used to having. For instance, the maintenance department more than likely has a fairly large number of workers working on project type work, building things, assembling things, putting in equipment that wasn't there in the past. This is not technically maintenance work because you're not maintaining an existing asset in its current form at the current capacity. Because of this kind of work really isn't part of your role technically. I know it may say that it is in the organized labor contract at your site if you have one, and it may be customary that you do it that way. But it's one of the places where you can plan ahead and say we're not going to be doing any project work for a period of time while we build the proactive maintenance structure. There are other places where you can shave off some time to free up resources, and I encourage you to think about those. Next, be realistic about workload versus time. It's going to be exciting, and you're going to be interested in getting your proactive maintenance program in place. But just remember that if you do it on the backs of the people, you're going to work them into the ground, and you're going to fail. So make sure that you clearly communicate to them what you expect. Give them reasonable expectations. It's okay to increase the workload. If people understand it, they'll buy in and give you the extra effort. But don't overload them so much that they fail. Third, more will be accomplished if the workload is kept within reasonable limits. For the same reason I mentioned before, people can't carry the world on their shoulders. Give them some more work to do. If they see that there's a payback, they'll help you. If you load them up too much, you're just going to struggle and they're going to get frustrated. Roll up resource requirements to the plant level. This is kind of a project management terminology here, but you just want to make sure that you're dealing with your resource requirements at all levels and everyone understands where they're going to come from and how you're going to staff up. First, ensure that demands for time, materials, and equipment are accounted for at all levels. This means that managers need to understand how they fit in and what you expect from them. The leaders at the site and at the company level need to have the same understanding. And then the people that you work with at your level and below need to understand what's expected of them. It's a multiple level project management initiative. Second, make certain that the leaders accept the plan and stick to the schedule, including themselves. The leaders are the ones that have to drive this. They have to understand that the plan takes time, there are some strategies to do, and it takes people time, it takes resources, materials, and money. And in order to accomplish what you need to accomplish, you need to stay on schedule, and that includes the task the leaders accept themselves. Next, we want to load level resources at the plant level, similar to what we did at the unit level. First, spread the work evenly over the available resources. This is only right. Second, account for the other work that must continue. As I mentioned before, this is not the only thing people have to do for a living. And third, include some contingency time to make sure that you have enough time to get it done and your schedule's not going to drift too far off track. Contrast the plan with spending limits. Obviously there has to be some control, so the plan can't just be what you want, but what you can afford to do. First, is the spending plan in line with the approved budget? If you built a budget, you have to live by the budget. That's one of the key elements in doing good reliability maintenance. Second, is the spending schedule in agreement with the budget? If your plan doesn't line up with the budget numbers, you need to do something to get it corrected. Either adjust the budget or adjust the schedule or a little of both. But make sure you're communicating at the appropriate level and dealing with it by the book. Third, if inconsistent, correct it as soon as it's identified. Don't wait. Make sure that people know exactly what's going on. A key element in maintenance and reliability is to make sure that information is communicated in a timely manner. Make adjustments to the Maintenance Management System, or CMMS, which really stands for Computerized Maintenance Management System. In your case, you may be using an Enterprise Resource Planning System, or ERP, which has a maintenance module included in it. Typical software of that type would be SAP or JD Edwards. There are a number of others. First, work tracked in the system should reflect reality. Don't let people go through the motions of putting in, for instance, a work order that has no information on it, and tracking things in a haphazard fashion with no comments, no documentation, or blanket work orders is even worse. Second, track all the work in the same system with no exceptions. In other words, work orders should be the central point for all the information that you collect on your equipment. It should be done that way for everything from phone repairs all the way up to the major equipment repairs that you do in your facility. Next, load your budget into your accounting system. Your accounting system might be part of your CMMS or ERP software, or it could be tied to the CMMS or ERP system. In either case, the same thing holds true. You need to have an accounting system that has the budget as it's expected to be tied in with the equipment that the costs are supposed to be rolling up to. Use the system, keep it accurate, keep it up to date. Obviously you're not going to be right all the time when you build a budget, but make sure that you keep reflecting reality and that as things change you make adjustments. The budget is a guide and something that you should try your very best to hold to, and when things don't go quite the way you expected them to, communication should be the rule. Report resource usage against the budget. Well, here we go again. You built a plan, you built a strategy, and you told people what the action items would be in your business case. If everyone agreed to that, then you should be reporting what you're doing and make sure that you're following along with your spending guidelines. This should be done at least monthly, or even weekly in some cases. It just depends on how your operation works and how much information you need to keep things running smoothly. Next, take action when the plan does not agree with the actual. Sometimes, as I said, you're going to have problems and things are not going to go so well. Do the best you can, communicate, make sure everyone understands why things are going the way they are. Now here's a very important concept. Maintenance and operations performance agreements specifications. What do we mean by that? Maintenance and operations must agree on performance specifications? That's right. Maintenance and reliability initiatives have some commitments that are made by both maintenance and operations, as well as engineering and the supply stream team. But when maintenance and operations decide on how the process is supposed to work, they both have an obligation to keep it working that way. So they need to agree. And at the department level, they must do that. They need to measure things like uptime, breakdown response time. How fast are the maintenance technicians responding to damaged equipment or repairs that are required by the production departments? How about planned downtime? Are we following along with what we expected, or is there more downtime than we thought there would be? Are we doing better? Cost. Cost, of course, drives so many things, etc. You can think of many different opportunities to do things to measure and set performance specifications. I've touched on this a little bit as we've gone through lessons 1 and 2 and talked about how each of the different areas or different responsibilities have a little different viewpoint on maintenance and reliability. Here's a diagram that might make it a little easier to understand. The leadership in any organization is driving for shareholder value. They're trying to create value for whatever they produce. So when you take a look at it, and maybe a good example would be a target, as you see on this slide, be a good visual communication tool for this. The target has a bullseye in the middle, and that would be low-cost producer. If you're in an operation where cost is really not the issue, but service is instead the most important factor, for instance in a public utility, you might not really have control over costs, but you'll have more control over the quality of your service. That's fine. You're still talking about being a producer that provides maximum value for the customer, no matter how it's measured. But for the most part, low-cost producer is a good example. Now let's take a look at how this affects each of the different groups: maintenance, operations, engineering, and the supply stream. Are they all shooting at the same target with the same bullseye in the middle of low-cost producer? Well, each of them independently might think so. Let's take a look at this. The maintenance department, or maintenance and engineering team as it sometimes also includes engineers, is normally directed to by its leadership to maximize reliability. That's what they control. They can actually make equipment more reliable by doing a good job with precision repairs, planning, scheduling, and execution, along with follow-up and analysis when they have problems. So that's what they'll focus on. It's common human nature to do what you can do. Operations. Their leadership will be more directed towards the minimization of downtime and the maximization of productivity and quality. So the production departments are going to drive toward making maximum output. This is almost a universal thing. The engineering department, they do project work. They do upgrades and modifications to machinery, so the direction that they're going to get from their upper leadership tends to be minimizing project cost and maximizing project value. These are the things that they control. They do projects and they decide how they're going to be done, and they manage it through cost control. The supply stream, which really includes the storeroom, purchasing, and accounting, has kind of a service role to the other three, but they are designed to really try to reduce inventory, but have the parts needed so maintenance can do their job and production doesn't lose any productivity because they don't have spare parts or the materials they need, and engineering gets the parts they need to do the installation of projects and that type of thing. So they're in a difficult position because each of those different groups is demanding things from the supply stream in a different manner. Let's think about this a little bit. When these four groups interact with each other and work toward the target or the goal in the center, the bullseye of being a low-cost producer, how do they react? Let's take an example. If the maintenance department needs to take some scheduled and planned downtime on a process line to provide maximum reliability through repairs and preventive maintenance, they would request that the operating department give them the downtime to do so. The operating department might be inclined to respond to the maintenance department by saying, no, we don't want to take this process down right now. We're running very well and we have some goals. We have some customers that are demanding product right now, and even though we committed in the past to allow you to take the downtime, we're not going to do it now. We're going to cancel it. Well, what just happened in that situation? The production department or operations crew is doing what they are directed to do in a way, minimize downtime. If they're running well, they're not going to take downtime. The maintenance department, however, can't provide maximum reliability because they weren't afforded the planned scheduled downtime that they were expecting. So they fail in their mission. Reliability of the equipment suffers, and productivity eventually suffers as well. So operations loses at the same time, even though they were trying to minimize downtime. Now, let's put the hat on a different person and say, let's look at it from a production standpoint. Let's say a production process is operating and producing a product and doing a good job, providing good quality, and then all of a sudden a failure occurs. They contact the maintenance department for help and require help and call it an emergency because they're not minimizing downtime and they're losing productivity. And the maintenance department is frustrated because they knew all along that the machine was going to fail. They predicted it, but they were never allowed the opportunity to fix it. In this case, the production department is going to demand that the maintenance department immediately provide service to fix the problem, which means they have to pull people off planned work to go work on the breakdown. Well, whose fault is the breakdown? Well, necessarily it's caused by both groups working together but not listening to each other. They both have the same goal, low-cost producer, but they're not working together to provide maximum reliability. How does the engineering department play into this same scenario? Well, in general, the engineering department may not be looking at life cycle cost, but instead installed cost, because it's the only part of the picture that they totally control. In other words, if they can purchase a piece of equipment that will produce as intended per the direction of the project, and they can buy it at a low cost, they will tend to choose the low cost option because it's the only thing that they control and the only thing that they're measured by. In a proactive organization, the life cycle cost of the machine would be the deciding factor for an engineer who would be buying the equipment to satisfy the standards and needs of the maintenance department for maintainability and the standards of the production department for reliability and productivity. In other words, they need to understand that there's more to doing a project than minimizing the installation cost, and they need to be rewarded for that when they do it right. Now let's take a look at the last group, the supply stream. They're very interested in reducing inventory, but the pressure from the other three groups is actually to stock as many parts as possible so that they don't incur any downtime and the parts are always there when things break down, and maximum reliability and minimum downtime can be upheld. The engineering department, at the same time, may not be quite as direct a player in this, but they tend to stock parts for a project based on recommended spare parts levels from the manufacturers, which tend to be quite high. So the supply stream's staff has a really difficult situation. In a proactive maintenance operation, all four groups would be interested in minimizing inventory. They would be interested in maximizing reliability through doing smart planned scheduled maintenance and smart scheduled downtime, and the production departments would know and buy into the fact that taking downtime and planning and scheduling is a key element. We can reduce the amount of downtime as we get more reliable. Engineering will provide equipment that will be reliable and run for a long time with very little problem. If all of these groups are thinking the same way, then the supply stream team can finally do what it's intended to do, and that is provide maximum service, fast response, minimal inventory, very low-cost suppliers of what is needed by the whole process. So I hope this kind of clarifies things and you understand how a reactive organization forces these four groups to actually collide on their way toward reaching their goal. They cannot reach the low-cost producer goal no matter how hard they try, even though they think they're doing exactly the right things. Until they see the big picture and they understand that they have to work together toward maximizing reliability above all else, they will not be able to reach their targeted goal of low-cost producer. This program, the Maintenance and Reliability Professional Review course, shows you how to get through this barrier and become the low-cost producer in any industry, anywhere in the world. The next thing to do in performance agreements and specifications is to agree on the roles and responsibilities of all individuals. Indicate who is specifically responsible for what tasks. I've seen this done before in what they call a responsibility matrix, where each individual task in the process is identified and the job title or position is identified as the primary responsible party, and a secondary responsibility is sometimes also identified in case one of those key personnel are out of the plant. Second, identify activities you do not want done by each role. In particular, this is very important for the maintenance planners because they will end up getting dragged into reactive maintenance work and chasing parts if you don't specifically state that planners will not be involved in emergency work and they will not be chasing parts for unplanned jobs. If you get them into this role, you will get absolutely no value from your planners. Third, define everything so everyone understands and supports the roles and responsibilities. Obviously, you don't want to turn this into a situation where everyone's standing around arguing about whose work it is and whose work it's not. You need to work together and help each other. But if everyone understands the spirit of each role and the responsibilities that are included in that role, so everyone continues to work on the things that they're targeted to solve, then you'll get good results. You'll spend your time where it needs to be spent and you'll get the reliability you're paying for. So here's where all of this comes together into something that's absolutely vital and critical. Put the performance agreement and specifications in writing. Put it down on paper. Put it down in detail, clearly spelled out. Do not overlook this step. It may take some time for maintenance and operations and engineering and the supply stream to agree on what the roles and responsibilities are and what's expected of every individual in the operation, but it needs to be done. The first time this is put together, which I suggest that you do while you build your strategy document for the first year, it may take a week. It may take some time from a group of people representing all of the different parts of the organization. It's absolutely critical. It's well worth the time. I guarantee it. Talk, listen, and discuss and reach consensus on who's going to do what and how it will be done. This is absolutely required. I know I'm beating this into you, but it's absolutely required. And lastly, and this is important, if you have set your process up correctly, you will have a champion for the process who has the authority to enforce the agreement. This is important because if you have an agreement that nobody's held to and no one is responsible to follow, and it can be overturned by leaders at the site without any argument, then you're sunk. The champion has to have the authority to enforce this agreement that is put in writing and signed off by all the departments. He needs to be able to enforce it all the way to the top. Track performance. As with all other activities in this process, after we put together a process, develop the action items, put the action items into place, we have to measure our performance. We measure everything, and measurement is what fuels all of the change. So in tracking performance, we need to identify a limited number of good measures. As always, a couple of good measures is always better than 100 bad ones. So put together some measures that mean something, and don't overload people with information. Put some trend lines together that obviously show whether you're moving in the right direction or not, and make sense to people. Monitor these measures carefully and share the data in a friendly format. I recommend line charts and bar charts, pie charts, anything that communicates clearly. Use a lot of color. Put the information up. Keep it simple and uncluttered. Don't send out 100 pages of charts in black and white to a list of people that have no use for the information. Post the information where it's easily, readily available and easy to understand and appropriate to the audience. Next, you need to meet to review the performance periodically. Every week, as you put together your maintenance work schedule for the next week, which you're going to talk about quite a bit in work management, but let me tell you, rest assured, you need to schedule work, and you're going to be talking about it at least weekly. At the weekly scheduling meetings, you need to talk about the performance from the week before. This should be something that you just routinely do. It should only take a minute at the beginning or end of the meeting. Just get in the habit of doing that. Make someone responsible for it. If you need to rotate it, that's fine. But the measures are going to be coming in through a process we built earlier that's consistent and put together by people that are responsible for it, and it should be in a timely fashion so you always have it. I would recommend that you have a monthly work management meeting where you talk about how the strategies and the plan and the initiative is going, and led by someone who's in a position of leadership, such as one of the maintenance champions. If you do this monthly, you can talk about how things are going, listen to people, discuss how it's affecting different areas of the plant. Some areas are going to do better than others, some are going to struggle, and the barriers are different, so try not to compare one area to another. They're each different. If you're comparing them, compare them to themselves in the past. Give them a chance to build on what they were. But the measures that you talk about monthly may be different than the ones that were discussed at the weekly meetings. Now, the other thing is each year you're going to do a strategy development session, and you're going to do a site assessment to measure where you are and where you're going to go. So annually, you'll have some numbers from the previous year that you can put up on the display in the front of the room, talk about it, probably in a PowerPoint format. But at any rate, no matter how you do it, you should see something similar to the spiderweb chart that we looked at that shows the general state of the union, if you want to look at it that way, from year to year. Each measure has an appropriate audience and frequency. Put them where they belong, and make sure that you communicate them. Well, we've reached the end of Lesson 2, Business and Management 2, so let's summarize. First, the risks of change must and can be managed. If you understand what the risks could possibly be by establishing a maintenance and reliability program that really works, you can manage them. Second, a well-constructed business case is a key element. Putting all this information for maintenance and reliability into terms that make sense to business leaders and support the key business objectives is critical to your success. You're not going anywhere without it. Third, communication is a critical component. You will be using communication as a tool throughout the whole process. As you become an expert in communication, you will become much more supported in your maintenance and reliability goals. Fourth, and this is pretty interesting, you must plan and budget this initiative, which is designed to create a culture that plans and budgets. So if you look at it from the standpoint that you're setting the example, you're blazing a trail, the better you plan and budget this initiative and manage it, the more buy-in you're going to get from the rest of the culture and organization at your site to plan and budget as well. Show them a good example and they'll follow you. Last, maintenance and operations as well as engineering and the supply stream must buy in. If they're not buying in, don't move ahead. You need to take the time to find out what the barriers are and remove them, and make sure that there's buy-in and support at all levels. Let's take a look ahead at Lesson 3, Manufacturing Process Reliability. Be careful now that you don't get confused between the pillar numbers, which are an SMRP numbering system, and the lesson numbers. There are 9 lessons, but there are only 5 pillars, so you're going to see some disagreement between the numbers. Manufacturing Process Reliability is Pillar 2, but Lesson 3 covers that material. Sorry for the confusion, but we wanted to make sure that the lessons are of equal size, and in some cases the pillars are covered over multiple lessons. Lesson 3 is going to cover manufacturing process reliability in its entirety, so let's take a look. First, we're going to talk about staying in compliance with the standards and specifications. We established those standards and specifications in Lesson 2. Second, we're going to understand the manufacturing process. We're going to talk about why the maintenance department needs to understand manufacturing and not just maintenance. We need to measure production effectiveness. The production departments are part of the reliability program, and here's where we're going to pull them into the mix and really give them an understanding of how important they are and how vital they are to the success of the program. Fourth, we're going to talk about environmental, health, and safety considerations. There are some. We need to make sure they're dealt with appropriately. And last, let's discuss management of change. Change is going to be an element that is not going to go away. Once we put this process into place, change is going to become a part of your culture. So let's talk about how we'll manage it. Congratulations, you've completed Lesson 2 of 9. We look forward to seeing you on Lesson 3. Have a good day.